Hello folks, and welcome to the Rifle Company Butterworth podcast. My name is Sean Arthur, and I'm one of the 9,000 Rifle Company Butterworth veterans who have served at Butterworth Air Force Base in Malaysia. In this series, we have explored the hidden story of one of the longest conflicts in the Australian Army's military history. In duration, it was second only to the war in Afghanistan. However, long before Afghanistan, there was another long conflict that lasted from 1970 to 1989, a full 19 years. Weirdly, this conflict has been erased from the Australian Defence Force's military record. Or should I say, it was never permitted to enter that record in the first place. This is Rifle Company Butterworth, that is, the RCB's long defence of the Air Force Base in Butterworth, situated in northern Malaysia. In this concluding podcast, I will try to answer some of the reasons why RCB was sent in the first place, and consider some of the pressure factors surrounding forcing the decision. I'll also explore why the CTs, the communist terrorists, probably never attacked Air Force Base Butterworth, and therefore why the government was so successful in its accidental plan. I will also explain why the RCB's successful defence of Air Force Base Butterworth has been a millstone around our neck ever since. There are also a few isolated threads that still need covering. I'll try and address a few of these, such as why the remaining old diggers of RCB put so much of our energy in tilting at this particular windmill. To start, I will now address the elephant of the podcast, as it were. The question remains that as the RCB veterans are claiming that our deployments were war service, why were we never attacked? How come there was no actual combat between us and our enemy? I myself have pondered this question for decades. It puzzled me even whilst in the midst of the QRF drills, the Quick Reaction Force drills back in the day. What was the CT's game, and how did we fit into it? After all those years of deep analysis and much research on my part, I believe that I now understand what held the communist hand. More importantly, why did the government strategy work? It all involved a weird combination of domestic Australian politics, the local geography, CT weapons, their doctrine, their capabilities, and their political infighting. And above all, the active deterrence of the Australian Rifle Company in the way we conducted our operations under the rules imposed upon us. Allow me to break all this down into what I assess is a compelling narrative, explaining the reluctance of the CTs to make an attack on Butterworth Air Force Base, and the Australian soldiers' success in preventing an attack. Australian politics dictated that the Australian troops were to be withdrawn from combat operations in Southeast Asia completely by the end of 1972. And yet, Australia was also obligated in supporting an ally under a multi-international defence treaty and in what was an active civil war. So an infantry force must be sent. Sending in riflemen was a must. We could not just send in army truck drivers, nor tanks, nor engineers, nor storemen. As to the size of that force, Labor, or the Liberal Country Party for that matter, couldn't send in a whole battalion. This was for two reasons. Why was such a large force required? I mean, a whole battalion for permanent overseas service, and supposedly only for training. Particularly when little or no cross-training with the Malaysian Armed Forces were ever evident. The more troops committed, the more attention the media will focus on the region. The second reason was that sending only a rifle company made financial sense. Not only was it easier to hide operational activities, it was much less expensive at a time when the defence budget was being butchered to fund other social programs. It was custom-designed war service at a budget price, and it solved the domestic political awkwardness at a single stroke. We were not sending troops into a war zone, it was just peacetime training. That's all well and good, but that doesn't explain the enemy's reluctance to attack a small foreign rifle company, and one that had been unaccountably hogtied by operational restrictions. Butterworth was a very attractive military target too. Big Malaysian military installations were often, and sometimes, repeatedly attacked by CT units. For the CTs, airbase Butterworth was nominally the easiest military pickings on the Malaysian peninsula in a great many ways. For a start, it was the closest airbase to the CT's operational home base in the Malay-Thai borderlands. The CTs could even just stand back off-site and rocket the airbase to blazes from 10 kilometres away, and yet they didn't. But yet they did so to many other Malaysian military bases. Why not Butterworth? For a start, there are a few geographical reasons. Ask any Army officer or senior NCO, military operations are 90% geography. If you look at a map, the Butterworth Air Base occupies the western fringe of the northern coastline, directly opposite the island of Penang. This limits attacking options by a great deal, but it does not eliminate them altogether. The enemy's best chance of attack was from the east, anywhere from the northeast to the southeast, but it was best attacked somewhere from the east. But all the areas to the east, while mostly uninhabited, still left the CTs with a bit of a problem. The first rule of insurgency operations is to strike hard and quickly withdraw to safety. Attacking from anywhere in the wide arc to the east of the airbase would certainly be productive. That's the side of the base where the expensive military toys and aircraft were parked. But after doing so, how could they withdraw to safety afterwards? The topography of Butterworth hasn't changed much in the last 50 years. It is still pretty much the same today. It is flat, empty croplands. An attack from the east would have quickly drawn the Australian Infantry Company to the area, and they would have annihilated the CTs in the open country as they tried to escape. If not manned by Australian soldiers, ordinarily, the enemy should have been able to overcome this problem by utilising competent withdrawal manoeuvres. A fighting withdrawal against inexperienced Malaysian conscripts might work, but against highly trained Australian RCB troops, it would have been another problem altogether. A fighting withdrawal is a very, very difficult operation. But the CTs had succeeded in attacking other Malaysian military installations in the dead of night. The airbase at Butterworth was not defended by 2-year Malaysian conscripts. The RCB were a professional infantry unit, superbly trained at this one highly specific and particular thing. A land attack against the airbase would probably be a suicide mission for the CTs. If a land attack on airbase Butterworth would prove difficult, what about other types of attack? The Malaysian military installations experienced rocket attacks up and down the length of the peninsula. Nearby Minden Barracks, situated in Penang, just across the strait, experienced a series of such attacks. The primary Malaysian Air Force base at Kuala Lumpur even suffered rocket attacks during that period. Military aircraft are particularly vulnerable to explosive rockets. Those other military bases were not defended by Australian troops. Say what you like about RCB claims of active deterrence, it seems that the CTs went to some lengths to avoid picking a fight with us. I would say there is more than sufficient evidence in what was otherwise an active and aggressive enemy in every other sense that the CTs just could not figure out how to breach the Australian defence of the airbase. Butterworth was a very legitimate target for them, and other similar targets had been attacked. Because of the continual insurgent activity surrounding the airbase, the threat of offensive action against Butterworth never went away. The RAAF intelligence files are full of warnings, and the RAAF commander never permitted the RCB as a whole even a day's departure from the base. At best, he would let slip out a platoon here and there for a couple of days training in the jungle, but never more than that. Our protective presence on site was mandatory. During the 2023 DHAT tribunal, it was suggested by the judging panel that the real deterrence might have been that the Communist Party of Malaysia declined to attack the Australians because they did not wish to open up the war to a larger Australian involvement. Okay, everybody is free to speculate. The RCB has done so, and I too have done so here. But at least with our speculation, we include the available evidence. By what evidence are these grand musings supported? The only intelligence at hand addressing the question are 2 strategic intelligence reports stating that the CTs, if choosing to attack, would probably not take into account national considerations. So it didn't much concern the enemy what uniform the defender was wearing, nor the ownership of the destroyed planes. Any destroyed military aircraft was fine. Blowing up an Australian Mirage or a Malaysian F-5 fighter was all the same to them. That's not the veterans saying that, but the Joint Intelligence Organisations, the GIO, strategic reporting. There are many other small considerations that affected the CT war effort. Many may have dented CT confidence. As the war ground down, the CTs managed to power through aggressively, but with ever-reducing manpower. They began to have difficulty replacing their losses, and the remaining fighters were getting older and carrying injuries. In part, this was caused by its greatest benefactor to that point, China. A propaganda radio service was set up in China at the end of the 1960s and was very influential for the communists on the peninsula. It was called Suara Revolusi Malaya, or the Voices of the Malaysian Revolution. It was funded by China and requested by Jinping himself as the Secretary General of the Communist Party Malaysia. Suara Revolusi Malaya, the clandestine radio which propagated the communist agenda, was then instructed to close down. It had been aired without any interruption from 1960 until the year 1980. The instruction to stop the operation of the communist radio for the Malaysian CTs was made by Deng Xiaoping, the successor to Mao Zedong. In these days of the internet and social media, it is difficult to comprehend the loss of such a guerrilla-friendly radio station created for a single purpose, not only for the lonely CT fighter in the jungle camp, but also for the propaganda and recruitment purposes for the Malaysian communist cause. The revolutionary message was being stifled from an unlikely source and by a former ally. I will try now and explain why the former old RCB diggers care so much about our fight with the bureaucracy and with our own government. I can imagine that many listeners of this podcast, especially if they've never served before, might be wondering, what's the deal? Is it really all that important? Because the RCB veterans were awarded the Australian Service Medal, the ASM, for our service in 2006, many in government circles were bewildered as to why the veterans were so persistent as to our stand for recognition. After all, we were already recognised by the award of the ASM for our service, just not the one we preferred. Even the tribunal agreed with this position. This is just another thing that they don't understand about us and obviously will never understand. I shall do my very best to explain why we are so adamant about this fight, but perhaps it won't be possible here either. Life in the military is not comfortable. It is not fair, and it is often not just. Soldiers do all the things that were asked of us. At times it can be very antisocial, and sometimes it can be a bit unnerving. We often miss the little family milestones that the civilian world takes for granted. If you are a parent, you may not be available for your kid's birthday. If you're a husband or wife, you may miss your spouse's birthday or anniversary. One doesn't just join the military, you conscript your entire family. Especially if the family anniversary takes place at a date when the operational or training calendar is crowded. There is a psychological understanding between every soldier and the military writ large. First of all, the military spends a great deal of time teaching us what it considers is important. Firstly, we are taught not to regard self. Instead, the very objective of your life is mutual assistance. The worst insult in the world for an Australian soldier is to be called by another soldier Jackman. Being a Jackman, as in I'm alright Jack, means just look after yourself and not your mates. The military is filled with 1,001 little taught philosophies that the civilian never knows about. And if they did, they probably wouldn't understand. Even with the PowerPoint presentation played on repeat, it wouldn't make sense, and sometimes it even feels a little wacky. Wacky it might be, but one accepts it as part of one's life. One of those traditions, as part of our particular social contract with the military, is that if you do the thing, you will be recognised for having done so. The primary, and usually the sole icon of recognition, is a little bit of metal and a small coloured ribbon to wear on your left breast. This says to the uncomprehending world that you did that thing, and you did it just as you were asked to do. Recognition is beyond important because it is the sole currency of the service. Sometimes there are material benefits attached to the ribbon, and sometimes not. But the ribbon is the living proof that you did your duty. In the case of the RCB, we did the thing. We did what was asked of us. We went to a civil war in a foreign but allied nation, and we were prepared to put our lives on the line for that country, for our country. That was the thing asked of us, and we did exactly that thing. Then, years later, a bureaucracy that was set up specifically to look after our interests now claimed that we didn't do the thing. At the time it was happening, they emphasized all the things as being vital for our country's interest. It equipped us for that thing, transported us, trained us, armed us for this one very purpose. It placed us in harm's way, which is fine, because why else have us? It was for this one fundamental reason why we were wearing baggy greens and patrolling in the dead of night, and we were prepared to shoot and be shot at. That is the ancient contract of the soldier. Do the thing and be recognized for it. Then, after Chen Peng's surrender, we were informed that our lived experience was a lie. This lie has now been confirmed by 20 different Australian governments since. Everything was a lie. This was the poor reward, the bitter falsehood we the veterans were forced to eat. But when we were on the ground in northern Malaysia, we knew differently. We knew the truth then, and the truth hasn't changed. The arguments put forward by the department and the tribunal for low risk threshold for airbase Butterworth and a non-existent expectation for casualties are really appeals from the government for us to not believe our own eyes. There is a massive evidence available to the contrary, and when it becomes too difficult to argue against it, the evidence is just ignored. Examples are abundant, such as Sir Arthur Tange, then the Secretary of Department of Defence, saying in January 1973 that the deployment of the Army forces could be, and I quote, communicated publicly as being for training purposes. Why should such a falsehood be communicated to the Australian public? What was being hidden? And lastly, why is the falsehood still required after 50 years? So even when the RCB's clandestine role is stated in plain English by the department's top bureaucrat, it is never again addressed. It just doesn't feature in any assessment as a defining position of the government. The veterans have to repeatedly point out that the sky is blue and water is wet. We were also heavily armed, at risk of death or wounding, whilst defending Airbase Butterworth, its personnel and its military assets. That the Butterworth Air Base not been attacked during those 19 years offered the Army a source of comfort, less so for the RAAF, whose primary responsibility the airbase remained. The long duration without enemy contact was psychologically reassuring to the Australian government. At the time of producing this podcast, an epic, record-breaking and historical bushfire is devouring a large part of Los Angeles. This part of the US coast is very similar to Australia's great regional bushfire zones. In fact, each country swaps firefighters with the other according to the relative season. Southern California is a very dangerous place to live. Parts of the region are reduced to ashes every couple of years. The threat may lay dormant for a long while, but can flash into life without warning because all the necessary ingredients are always present, just like Australia. However, the longer the disaster doesn't happen, the safer you may personally feel. You watch your more distant neighbours experience a terrible and shocking outcome, and yet nothing happens to you. Psychologically, you feel safer, but in reality, you have no grounded reason to justify this feeling. The actor and comedian Billy Crystal just lost his house of 45 years. He raised his kids and grandkids in the house. He and his family felt safe even as northern neighbourhoods were engulfed much further away in previous years. But all the necessary ingredients for an inferno were always present in this neighbourhood for all those 45 years. Long-lasting droughts, a steady and growing fuel source nearby, insufficient attention to modern urban fire control, and a lack of funding for fire services. Do you see where I'm going with this? Just like the Australian and American bushfires, RWF Butterworth buried its head in the sand to an uncanny degree. Even the two surviving JIO threat assessments only said that an external attack was unlikely for the reporting period. It said nothing, zilch, about an internal conflict. The reports listed 6 different scenarios where the CTs might possibly attack the base in different ways according to differing circumstances. That's 6 of them. How the tribunal could read the entire document and be reassured that an attack was unlikely remains an unbounding mystery. And only with the benefit of hindsight can you make more positive judgments, because the contemporary intelligence assessments did not leave much room for happy conclusions. No sooner were these 2 intelligence reports published than the Saigon government fell into communist flames. If these assessments were so deterministic, how did the national intelligence agencies fail to predict the loss of South Vietnam? The vast majority of the Australian veteran community supports our fight. There are a few who don't. The Australian military is now slavishly devoted to the peacetime myth for reasons that are not entirely evident. In recent times, they have begun to look very foolish, given the wealth of information now at hand. While the tribunal gave the department a severe drubbing for still insisting that all was peacetime at Butterworth at the time and that there was no threat, the Army still insists on sticking to that story. In doing so, they look ridiculous in trying to argue that point. Such departmental efforts were more successful in the days before RCB veterans gained access to the formally classified documentation. It's like the Vatican today insisting that the Sun orbits the Earth and that Galileo was a dummy for believing otherwise. To me and the other veterans, it is more an interesting question as to why they stick with that peacetime story. There are theories, though none of them satisfactory. The problem is, it must be obvious to even the most hidebound Colonel Blimp that the Australian Rifle Company was in the middle of a civil war and therefore threatened by risk of attack. How could it not be otherwise? Sir Arthur Tange spelled out specifically that the training lie was only for public consumption in 1973. So what is it? Some veterans speculate that by not recognising RCB service as warlike is a ploy to deny pensions and gold card medical relief. But some of us have already crunched the numbers, and the difference is not all that much different in pension payouts. Of the original 9,000 RCB veterans, a great bunch of us are now dead. Another significant number of us went on to other conflicts, and we had qualifying war service conditions met on those operations. Many veterans experienced multiple deployments to RCB, so the 9,000 figure was already unreliable from the get-go. Plus, those veterans with provable injuries due to military service, and I am one of them, already have a part or full pension as compensation. This brings us purely to military pensions, but that isn't greatly different to the Australian old age civilian pension. So denying recognition on a monetary basis doesn't make a great deal of sense. Possibly there are now only about 1,000 or maybe 2,000 of us left who may get some additional benefit, possibly. So if not financial motivation, why does the Defence Department resist so hard? To me, it seems to be a choice of the professional military careerist class alone. Those very senior general officer ranks who want to get ahead and must be seen to be on side with the government. That's precisely how one does get ahead to the exalted ranks, by agreeing with the government. You see, this topic of RCB service status transcends ordinary military or civilian sensibilities and has now attained a universal governmental hostility. They have been so committed to the lie that these bureaucrats cannot imagine living a life where the inclusion of 19 years of our RCB warlike service must be entered into the Australian military history books. It should be shameful for them, because these same civilian and military figures have insisted for decades that it was only peacetime service. Then to have these same military officers officiate at a little ceremony at the War Museum dedicating a little section to our service would be unthinkable. We have seen their contempt for us and the language they use about us in recovered archived documentation. You can't insist for 50 years that something was not so, and then on a dime be gracious and self-critical to the point where you could admit that you were wrong the entire time. The military rarely admits a mistake, yet plenty of other very senior ex-officers outside the bureaucracy not only admit the truth, but also fight alongside the diggers, shoulder to shoulder. They offer leadership and service to the other ranks, just as they did when they stood beside them in the line in the old days. But the other ranks themselves are very much in the fight. We are not the young and compliant teenagers we once were. All the RCB diggers together are fighting the hypocrisy, and we are being disgraced by those who should be relied upon to support us. The general officer ranks have crab walked away from us to take up their positions against us, so be it. I am not one to denigrate another person's service. We all did what we were called to do, and some were not called at all, but they were just as prepared to fight as those who did. All of us who have served are brothers and sisters in uniform. That is our bond. It must be noted that most of the officers who have attacked RCB service also sport distinguished service decorations on their chest. These are not campaign medals of the like that we are petitioning for. These are specific gallantry awards given for highly successful command and leadership roles during active operations. It seems that very few are selected to high command without one of these awards sitting on their left tit. There have been questions raised about how easily distinguished service medals seem to get handed out. Most overseas tours end in this award for the commanding officer as a matter of course, and they are then eligible to rise up on the invisible golden escalator to an even more magnificent ranks. At some unknown point during their elevation, they cease being a military officer and start becoming a military politician. Those of us from the 1970s and 1980s, and even in more recent conflicts, should be permitted to ask, how is it that an ordinary rifleman can't even get their overseas service recognised, whilst a very senior officer can receive gallantry medals, no less? Often they were sitting in command headquarters far behind the lines in relative safety. When did these shiny bottoms ever have to justify their awards before a DHAT tribunal, and have a mere brigadier general call out their service as bullshit? Yes, it is that harsh to say it, but better to call it for what it plainly is. Generals in those cases can be recommended by their own cohort for awards. Thus, the 15% collect the 75% of the available gongs. By comparison, if you are senior enough in the military, it is pretty smooth sailing. If our service is going to be judged, let the service experiences at the top of the tree have an open examination as well. I would like to say that even if we think the 2023 DHAT Tribunal got it wrong, they still gave us one of the best versions of inquiries that the RCB diggers ever received. They did not toady to the Defence Department, instead they called them out, and at times quite severely. I personally think that the tribunal were true to their oath, in that they tried to do the best with the mess that they inherited. They ended up still getting stuck up on a pole, as so many other tribunals had before them. The tribunal believed that they had found a key to the RCB quagmire, one that was to be found in an obscure government decision made in 1993 that was only aimed at future deployments. So they tried to force a narrative to fit that plan. They invented shades of grey in what was otherwise straightforward and ordinary circumstances. They introduced degrees of significance when none existed before. If the tribunal all agreed that the risk was certainly present at Butterworth, and this awkward acknowledgement must be qualified with a grading that was not to be found in legislation nor in definitions under the Act, because risk is risk. And we now have modern methodologies that can accurately and scientifically assess risk to military deployments. The modern Defence Department does this all the time, but better to go with an untested, novel and manufactured low-risk assessment and just leave it there. But by whose reckoning was RCB service low risk? Please point to us how you arrived at that decision, because even the two prime intelligence documents that the tribunal relied upon never quantified that exact ingredient. It took the tribunal itself to condense all that information available to it and decide to exclude everything to the contrary, just to go with their correct narrative. It seems that 240 submissions from 140 different RCB veterans were all for naught. Veteran submissions were accepted as fact by both the tribunal and the department, but they carried no further weight thereafter. Poof, they were gone, just like that. What value in real terms was our lived experience to the tribunal? It was never really explored nor identified. Still, I don't believe that the tribunal, in its heart, meant wrong. It just got it wrong, as many inquiries had before it. The one day of the year in Australia is Anzac Day, 25th of April. It is a day to honour the veterans, whether they still be serving or now retired. Since I left the Army so many years ago, I cannot find it in myself to take my place on the march. It is just too difficult for me. How can I wear my medals on Anzac Day march when my own country denies my service? I did the thing asked of me, and my country has turned its back. Instead, I stand in the street and watch my comrades march. I watch with pride, especially the younger men and women returned from their own war service. Many of them still carrying scars, and most of those scars not even visible. I'm proud of them as they take their place in the long line of military service. They in turn will have others replace them, but right now they have earned their personal spot on the march. It seems that me and my mates have not. This saddens me more than I care to think. What we did for our country in Butterworth was active service. We should be recognised for doing the thing that we're paid to do. Well, this has probably been incomprehensible as an explanation, but unfortunately it is the best I can do in explaining the RCB veterans' sentiments about it. Whether it makes any sense or not, this is the reason why we are still bitterly fighting this fight, and the struggle shall continue whether we win in the end or not. Concerning the Royal Australian Air Force, the RAAF. Adding to the general confusion was the RAAF experience in Butterworth during the period. It really was a hodgepodge. In fact, many had a few side benefits not seen in Australia, such as access to maids and nannies assisting with their families in Penang. If you were an avionics fitter, you may have even been working in a sterile air-conditioned lab on base. If you were an airframe fitter or part of a refuelling gang, you had been on the flight line out in the tropical heat. RAAF chefs would be supervising local cooks instead of doing most of the work themselves. To many of these RAAF folk, the war was simply a background radiation as they got on with their daily routines. But some RAAF airmen and airwomen felt the war a bit more directly. If you were an airfield ground defence airman, an AGD, it would be a different experience. The AGD were the ones normally tasked with airbase protection, such as in Australia. They would conduct repeated and lonely patrols with dogs along the flight line. These guys had the same operational warnings about the enemy threat as we did. Butterworth Air Base was the only RAAF installation in the world that had Army riflemen defending it. As I keep saying, RCB weren't guards. They already had RAAF chaps on station doing that job. While the Army Company had a more grubby and tedious business at Butterworth, whether they liked it or not, every one of the RAAF personnel were likewise exposed to threat. It didn't matter if you were a fireman, cook, clerk, pilot, storeman, mess steward, or truck driver. If the enemy decided to bring in the boom, then you might become a casualty as any of us. Airbase Butterworth couldn't access the enemy's mind, and the local intelligence was always on the edge of Amber Alert. Some RAAF people were even more attuned to the threat than others, particularly if they had families in country. Nothing focuses the mind better than needing to protect your children, and the RAAF families were of concern. Part of the RCB responsibilities under the Shared Defence Plan had the Rifle Company flying in to rescue or airlift RAAF families if the requirement came to pass. Butterworth Air Base had its own civilian radio station, staffed by volunteers. One of its functions was to issue a warning alert over the air if required. All this was planned and authorised in preparation for hostilities, and yet the official Defence Department statements continued to mouth the peacetime lie. A last word on RCB. Napoleon Bonaparte once said that history is a set of lies agreed upon. Winston Churchill joked that history will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. Julius Caesar, the famous Roman general, greatly admired, often had but one single information source about his achievements: his own word, his own writings. Inherent in the above quotations is that history only becomes history once it has been blessed by the authorities. Facts are facts, but governments have agendas. Nation-states spend so much time in promoting certain historical narratives and excising others completely. In Australia, Anzac Day celebrates incredible bravery, mateship and self-sacrifice. On the 25th of April 1915, a multinational landing force landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The country was officially only 14 years old at the time. That single day helped create the modern Australian character and how we thought about ourselves then and how we still do today. That 1915 landing was so significant that on the first anniversary the following year, it was even celebrated by Australian and New Zealand troops while they were in France, just as they were setting up for the continued fight in Europe. However, to be blunt, the first Anzac Day was also a day that we invaded another country. 3 years after that celebrated April Day in 1918, Australian soldiers drove out the advancing Germans from the village of Villiers-Bretonneux in a famous counterattack that saved the important British base of Amiens. The battle was won on the third anniversary of the Anzac Day landings. Anzac Day was forever enshrined as a national day. But there are many other perspectives about Anzac Day rarely considered. Notice we still refer to it as landings instead of invasion. It is subtle, but landings sound a lot more neutral. The incident has a different historical vibe than, say, the D-Day landings. A famous quote attributed to Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the Turkish general and founder of modern Turkey, goes in part, and I quote, "You, the mothers who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace. Having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well." This beautiful inscription appears on the Kemal Ataturk Memorial and Anzac Parade in Canberra. It is a beautiful sentiment, and one that has sustained generations of Australians about the magnanimity of a victorious enemy. It has also helped to cement a long-lasting, friendly relationship between our two countries. The problem is, Ataturk almost certainly never said those beautiful words. It is most likely an invention of the newspapers in 1934. No research has yet uncovered the actual speech where he supposedly said those words, and no single independent source backing the news story has ever surfaced. Ataturk did describe the Anzacs as a brave and worthy foe, but it has never been proven that he went beyond that. It probably just was an invention to help soothe what was a military disaster and to comfort distressed mothers, fathers, wives, and children who deeply missed fallen loved ones. The thing is, even though most likely it was an invention, it is largely a harmless one. And if it continues to nurture friendly feelings towards an old enemy, what's the harm? However, it is also a testament to how official versions can become written, literally, in stone. There is one last point to make on the subject. I heartily dislike invented historical incidents with every fibre of my being. Good, bad, or indifferent, let the truth be told. Objectively, we should strive for historical truth as an absolute baseline. We keep getting into trouble when we emphasize adults, and in far too many times, deliberate falsehoods are inserted into history because it is politically convenient. Sometimes it is thought better to have a confident falsehood in place rather than the simple, boring truth. The RCB story isn't a conspiracy theory. Conspiracies operate in the twilight between day and night. You get the classic conspiracy theory when there are critical gaps in the story. Take the 30 plus different JFK assassination theories. The RCB narrative, therefore, cannot be a conspiracy because all the determining factors have been laid bare for all to see. RCB evidence are also the actual government and defence records, not the soft and secret whispers in the dark. If you want to prove something about RCB, just go to the relevant records and you will find it. It's true, many important documents critical to our cause are now lost, but not so many as to disprove our claims. If you are searching for truth, the veterans have discovered it with top secret classification stamped all over it. We are not asking you to believe anything. Just look and you'll see. The Australian Defence Department, knowing that they have been beaten by their own data, have changed tack. They are now attempting to either ignore demonstrated facts or to try and change the meaning of those facts. They refused to go on oath during the last tribunal. We are entitled to ask why. They refused to either provide evidence requested of them or to make formal comment from the RCB provided evidence. Once again, why? All the department has left on the table, and on so many topics, is silence. On some RCB topics, a great deal of departmental noise was made, but none of it was said under oath. I guess that the only difference was the legal consequences of perjury. What's worse, repeated RCB inquiries are still mired in established historical legends. Tribunals are unable to read a simple documentation without referring back to the history, as it is the department prefers it to be accepted. If our service was no different to so many other deployments, you don't need a conspiracy. You just need furious obstinacy. The Australian Defence Department is like a toddler, refusing to have its nappy changed because it says it doesn't need it. However, those of us with a sense of smell beg to differ. On Friday, the 9th of February 2025, the DHAT Chair, Mr. Stephen Scahill, attended a Senate inquiry into the Australian Defence Honours and Award System in order to provide evidence in response to submissions provided and also to answer directed questions. Mr. Scahill expended most of his opening statement in trying to discredit a submission provided to the Senate inquiry by the RCB veterans. Our submission claimed that the DHAT Tribunal was wrong in its ruling on multiple fronts. His attack was broadly made, and he said that the RCB submission was riddled with errors. If that was so, it should have been an easy to throw a couple on the table by way of example. He didn't. The RCB submission in question was carefully written, was factual, and cited legislation and case law. In effect, our submission didn't attack DHAT itself, but claimed that the tribunal's RCB assessment was wrong in law, was founded upon an error, particularly the 1993 Cabinet decision, and introduced elements and degrees not set as standard in any prior hearing. Things like, there may have been risk at Butterworth, but not enough risk. What? That suggestion is definitely a troublesome subjective qualification, isn't it? Besides which, Mr. Scahill is welcome to deny our submission, but he can't declare it that contained errors. That is too much of a judge ruling on himself. Still, I did feel for Mr. Scahill and the entire DHAT system on a human level. The Senate hearing was going over the entrails of the awards and honours process, and they heard from a great many submissions who were thoroughly dissatisfied with the DHAT investigations. That morning there were multiple representations from former SASR and other veteran groups, but they also heard from family advocates. Families don't serve directly, but the soldier, sailor, or airman inadvertently recruits their loved ones into what can be a thoughtless and uncaring system. None of these people spoke out in favour of DHAT, nor of its processes. None. That Mr. Scahill was forced to listen to such disappointment about his life's work, and what he might himself consider to be a criticism of his and his team's professionalism. This brought him directly into the veteran tent in ways that he may not even fully appreciate. Because, dear listener, what Mr. Scahill experienced that weekday is what every veteran experiences at every tribunal. We get attacked by the Defence Department. We get told that our lived experiences are wrong, and that the simple evidence we provide has no substantial value or quality. Listening to this very decent man protest his good intentions made me want to take him out for a beer. And the tribunal's intentions were not only decent, but noble. We are not concerned about the tribunal's intentions, at least not the ones chaired by Mr. Scahill. You see, Mr. Scahill and his colleagues are polite, considered, learned, hard-working professionals. They are most definitely not patsies to the Defence Department. That is the hill on which I will die upon. Mr. Scahill, in fact, very eloquently took apart the Defence's submission during this inquiry. The Defence Department wanted to just deny all process to veteran claims. It wanted itself to be the sole decider on who gets what. Yet, in its own submission, DHAT claimed that the tribunals weren't adversarial, and that one side doesn't pull apart the claims of the other. This was so breathtakingly incorrect during the RCB inquiry that it made me doubt that I even attended. Can DHAT seriously entertain that defence wasn't entirely bullish, obstructive, and unhelpful? If DHAT is mystified at how it is being perceived by the veteran community, then perhaps its viewing point may be just a bit too lofty. It might seek a bit of informal feedback from those whose recommendations to government are the cause of so much crushing resentment. It seems to me that the DHAT inquiry process is entirely too legally deterministic. DHAT would argue back that it must be, because how otherwise can a decision be determined? But the problem with just strictly ruling on articles of law, or at least trying to, is that it doesn't cover neither the human elements of the conflict, nor of the myriad instances where the law doesn't cover the particular circumstances. In the case of the RCB, the tribunal used a metaphysical ball hammer to try and force a legal outcome. To deal with the law example firstly, with the RCB, all this nonsense going back more than 50 years could have been strangled at birth. The government of the day should have just allocated RCB for active service, done and dusted. But the government didn't want to do that because it would screw up the official public deception lie, wouldn't it? So we failed the ordinary legal requirement because of reasons of grubby politics. 50 years later, we all must undergo legal mumbo-jumbo reasonings over what should have been boringly straightforward, bureaucratic box-ticking. Secondly, DHAT is completely blind as to the human element of the veteran experience. I myself know Vietnam veterans who were never personally shot at. Some never fired a single aim shot at the enemy. One former forward scout I know experienced a single wild shot in his direction during his entire tour. Many Vietnam soldiers only fired off towards far-off tree lines because, contrary to movies, most enemy soldiers are allergic to exposing themselves to direct fire. Usually these same poor diggers walked around on ground littered with booby traps. All this academic talk of degrees of threat and risk in an air-conditioned tribunal room after a nice lunch doesn't exactly match what the veterans experience in the dead of night with a known enemy lurking beyond the wire. Chin-scratching legal argument must enjoy sovereignty, and a deterministic ruling is discovered, and one that was first proposed 23 years after armed Australian soldiers were first sent in to protect a foreign military airbase in what was a civil war. Yet the RCB veterans denied recognition are said to be sucking sour grapes. We are supposedly motivated for some sort of financial benefit. How exactly? I know of Afghanistan veterans being denied a necessary medical gold card. So what chance do we have? All I can say about it is this. If you have never walked the line at Butterworth, how dare you? How dare you say that we are to be denied true recognition for our services because a bunch of politicians didn't get around to making up their mind about it for a full 20 years. And when they did, it wasn't even addressing our service at all. It was some sort of catch-all and devised on the fly in 1993. And even worse, it wasn't even meant to be retrospective. This is how lawyers can be led by a carrot and a stick in any direction that politicians want them to be led, all the while honestly believing that they are doing what is correct and what is right. Until the system truly understands this, the government better expect that the RCB will fight this fight until there is only one determined veteran still breathing. In truth, we ourselves are truly sick to death of this fight more than anyone else. But in the end, the height of the hill won't prevent its being taken. That's how we were trained, and that is how it's going to be. Thank you for listening to the RCB podcast. We are privileged that you have taken an interest in this part of our military and political history, as so very few have. If you are an Australian citizen, and if you have the inclination to do so, you may even be able to help us. We would ask you to contact your local federal member and ask them to investigate or promote this RCB cause. I know it is a lot to ask because nobody wants to contact a politician, but it is exactly the sort of direct action that may pump the issue over the line for us. They depend upon public disinterest so as to suppress us, so as to suppress the truth. Anyway, you now have enough information to at least ask yourself if any of the government's positions make even an ounce of sense. If you contact them, you may be told the official line. No, I correct myself. You will be told the official line. But that's what the official lines are for, to kill honest inquiries. I'm afraid that with the odds stacked against us, we have nothing on our side other than public opinion to help us. You might not think so, but a simple phone call or email might work wonders. RCB veterans can make the fight for recognition ourselves, but getting public attention is our main drawback. Nobody in government cares, and unfortunately, the public has never heard of our little 19-year adventure in North Malaysia. Alas, we don't have the money to mount a federal court challenge, and one where the department is not permitted to flout its legal obligations. In any case, it's not money that we are requesting. Public support in our fight is to be cherished. Thank you for listening to the last RCB podcast. We are privileged that you have taken interest in this part of our military and political history. So very few have. We have nothing on our side other than public opinion to help us. No one in government cares. This has been a production of the RCB Veterans Group. The podcast was written and produced by myself, Sean Arthur. I would especially like to thank the tireless efforts of the RCB Research Group, who have brought a level of professionalism in driving our collective efforts to the government's doorstep. I would also like to thank the RCB Veterans Group, who have been taking on the veteran fight for a very, very long time, especially at a period when the RCB space was mostly vacant. Both veteran groups have shown no lessening of resolve, even as the years roll on. There are men and women in both of these groups whom I deeply admire for their persistence in writing a historical wrong. I joined their ranks about 5 minutes ago. I have still trouble understanding how they just won't stay down after being knocked to the ground repeatedly by such an unfair process. It is probably just pure bloody-mindedness that fuels them. And lastly, with the continuing and heartfelt thanks to the 9,000 Australian Army veterans who served in RCB between the years 1970 and 1989. Thank you very much for listening.